Hello, welcome to this presentation, Introduction to Referencing using the Oxford University Standard for Citation of Legal Authorities, otherwise known as OSCOLA. My name is Lorna Rosbottom, and I am one of the academic liaison librarians who supports the law school here at University of Westminster. What we're going to go through today, we're going to look at what referencing is and when you reference, and then we're going to think about how you reference. So the general rules of OSCOLA, citing secondary sources such as books and journal articles, citing primary sources, legislation and cases. We'll look at how you can cross-reference your footnotes and where you can go for further help and advice. So to start off, what is referencing? Referencing is a system of accurately recording the authors, sources, and ideas that you have used in your work. Now, there are various different kinds of referencing systems that are used by different subject areas. You may have used other systems before, such as Harvard. The principles behind them are essentially the same. And there's some important things that correct referencing does. Acknowledging the contribution that other authors have made to your thinking and argument, and therefore respecting the intellectual property of authors by giving credit to their work. In addition to these concerns, correct referencing also demonstrates the extent of your reading and your understanding of the subject area. And it enables also your reader to trace your sources and to be able to check those sources or follow up and do further reading. Importantly for your studies at university, correct referencing and accurate referencing will help you to avoid committing plagiarism, which is essentially presenting other people's ideas as if they were your ideas. So by learning how to reference properly, you will avoid slipping into any kind of problems with plagiarism. So when do you reference? Firstly, and most simply, when you quote directly from a source. So if you have taken the exact words of another author, then you need to include a reference to show where you got those words from. But apart from like a direct quote, when you're discussing the ideas of another author's work, and you're doing that in your own words, you also need to make sure that you accurately reference where those ideas have come from. When you discuss ideas in your own words, this is known as paraphrasing. If you include in your work any tables or diagrams from any other source, you will also need to provide a reference. And remember, when you're quoting or paraphrasing, you must pinpoint exactly where you've taken those words or ideas. So in the case of a book or a journal article, that will be the page number or the page range where those ideas have come from. Okay, some general rules with OSCOLA. When you're citing a particular source, all OSCOLA citations must appear as footnotes on each page. So you don't use in-text citations, so you don't put the details of the source in your actual text, nor do you put them all at the very end of the work. You provide footnotes each time you cite a source. What you do need at the end of your work is to set out all the sources that you have used. So anything that appears in your footnotes should appear in your bibliography at the end of your work. And the best way to set this out so that it's clear is that you can provide a table of the cases that you've referred to, followed by a table of the legislation that you've referred to, and then finally a bibliography of your secondary sources, so your books and journal articles. Um, it's always worth checking in your module handbook or asking your lecturer to see if they have a particular way that they want you to set out your bibliography at the end of your work. Another peculiarity of OSCOLA is that when you provide a footnote of a source, you must always close that footnote with a full stop. But in your bibliography, you do not have to put a full stop at the end of your reference. And we'll see some examples of that as we go through the other slides. For journals and law reports, the titles of these can be abbreviated. And you can check abbreviations using the Cardiff Index to Legal Abbreviations. And I've provided the web address for you here. Or you can, if you can't remember the web address, you can just Google it and find it. It's an incredibly useful website, both for decoding an abbreviated title so that you're able to search for it, and for finding what the approved abbreviation is so that you can reference a particular work. You don't need to cite the URL of a journal or a law report if you've accessed it via Lexis or Westlaw, the two legal databases, or through finding it on Library Search. You only need to cite the URL if the article is from an internet-only source. Now, in terms of setting out your quotations, for short quotations, you can incorporate them into your paragraph. So anything up to 3 lines you can incorporate into your paragraph. And you can use double quotation marks to indicate that you're directly quoting another author's words. At the end of your quote, you then put your punctuation. So if that is the end of the sentence, make sure that you put your full stop outside of your quotation marks. And then your footnote marker follows the punctuation. So if you're using Word, for example, you just go into the top toolbar ribbon and select references, and you'll see a button that says insert footnote, and that will provide you with a running number, and it will automatically give you the space at the bottom of the page to add your footnote. For longer quotations, you should, for clarity, you should set them out in an indented paragraph. So leave a space before and after the indented quotation. And that is really to provide the reader with clarity that this is a long quotation. You do not need to use quotation marks for an indented paragraph quotation, but you do need to remember to put your footnote marker at the end of it. Okay, so that's a little bit about general rules. Now we're going to take a look at examples, and the first one up is an example of a book. When you're citing a book, OSCOLA sets it out as follows. You put the author of the book with a comma, followed by the title in italics. You then, in brackets, put any additional information, the edition, if it's later than the first edition, the publisher, and the year. Now, the place of publication need not be given, and we'll see this in the example on the next slide. So it's only the publisher you need to refer to. And when you're citing an edition other than the first edition, use the format EDN, so second EDN for second edition, or REV EDN for revised edition. And the section that says any additional information, this is just if there's something that is going to clarify for the reader. So that can include maybe an editor, but it would also include things like if it's a translated work, the translator. And here are some examples. So you'll see in the example of the reference in the footnote, and this is another thing to bear in mind with OSCOLA, you put the author's name as it appears on their work. So that is usually going to be first name, last name. So in this case, it is Andrew Burrows, comma, then the title, Remedies for Torts and Breach of Contract, in italics. We then have the brackets and third edition, comma, OUP 2004, close brackets, and then you'll see that there is a full stop at the end of the footnote. But there is remarkably little punctuation in OSCOLA. So in a way, it's quite a clear referencing system. When you're quoting or paraphrasing from specific pages in a book, you need to pinpoint the page number in the footnote. So, for example, if you were quoting from page 135, you would simply add the number 135 at the end of your reference and before the full stop. So you don't need to put page 135 or P135, you just put the number 135. Now, when it comes to the bibliography, you will notice that in the reference, the author's surname is coming first. And in OSCOLA, when you write your bibliography, you always switch the name around so that the surname comes first. And this is so your list will be alphabetical. You also just use the initial of their first name, but you need no comma in between. So in this example, we have Burrows A, then a comma, Remedies for Torts and Breach of Contract, third edition OUP 2004, and you'll note that there's no full stop at the end of the reference because this is your bibliography. OUP is the abbreviation for Oxford University Press, and it is totally acceptable to abbreviate your publisher if it's a commonly known abbreviation. Next up is a book chapter in an edited work. So when you have an edited work, you'll have many different authors contributing to the book, and you might want to cite a particular chapter within that book. So the order here is the chapter author and the chapter title, and you'll see that the chapter title comes in single inverted commas, in, and then you give the name of the editor or the editors, and then the rest of the information is as a book is, so book title, edition, publisher, and so on. It's not necessary to give the page range of the chapter in your bibliography, and when you're quoting or paraphrasing, you pinpoint the relevant page number in your footnote in the same way as you do with a book. So let's look at our examples here. So Philip Handler is our chapter author, legal history is our chapter title, and then it tells you where that chapter is from. So in Dawn Watkins and Mandy Burton, in brackets eds for editors, and then a comma, and then the rest of the details. In the bibliography, we switch around the chapter author's name, so it is now Handler P, but you don't need to change the order of the book editors, so they can remain as Dawn Watkins and Mandy Burton. Journal articles. There are a slight variation for journal articles depending on whether the journal has a running volume number or not. So in the first example, we have the article author, who is Paul Craig. We have the article title, in inverted commas, which is Theory, Pure Theory, and Values in Public Law. And then we have the year of publication, which was 2005, and it comes in square brackets. You then have the abbreviation of the journal, PL, and the first page of the article, which is 440. Now, the reason that it's in square brackets, the date, is because there is no volume number. The date is essential to be able to locate the journal article, to locate the right volume of the journal. If, however, the journal has a running volume number, so in the second example of Alison L. Young, in defense of due deference, you'll see that the 2009 publication date is in round brackets. What follows that is then the volume number, 72, the journal abbreviation, MLR, and the first page of the article, 554. So in this case, I would know that it was in volume 72, so the date wouldn't be as essential as in the first example. So that's why you will see some journal articles referenced with square brackets and some referenced with round brackets. When you're quoting or paraphrasing from a journal article, you pinpoint it in the footnote by putting a comma at the end of your reference and adding the relevant page number. So in this example, if we were quoting from page 556 of Alison Young's article, we put that at the end of the reference. So volume 72, MLR, the first page of the article is 554, then a comma, and then the page that we are quoting from, in this case 556. When you come to add your article to the bibliography, in addition to remembering to switch around the author's surname, so that comes first, you also just take off any pinpoints. So then your bibliography reverts back to just the volume number, journal title, and the first page of the article. Okay, before we leave the citing of secondary sources, I just wanted to raise the issue of secondary referencing. So this comes up when, let's say in this example, we were reading Graham Virgo's article, Why Study Law? The Relevance of Legal Information. And in that article, Graham Virgo has quoted Bernard Hibbett's from his article, The Technology of Law. So we've read a quotation from Hibbett's in Virgo's article, and the question is, well, how do I cite that? The first thing to recognise here is that it's always best practice to try and see the original material, to read the original material and cite from the original material. And a good reason for this is that you're then not just seeing a quotation in isolation, but you're actually seeing the whole context of what that author had written. And that really is good practice for you to use your own judgment and analysis of what authors are saying. However, this is obviously not always possible. So if you do need to cite a secondary reference, you can do so in the following way. In the footnote, you put the title, the reference to the author that was being quoted. So in this case, the Bernard Hibbett's article, Volume 102, Law Library Journal, page 101. And then in brackets, you put as cited in, and then give the information of the source where you actually read it. So Graham Virgo, Why Study Law, The Relevance of Legal Information. And you give the page number where you found the quote. When you come to the bibliography, you only reference the Virgo article because you didn't actually read the Bernard Hibbett's article, so you just include the Virgo article in your bibliography. Okay, so we're now moving on to primary sources, and we're going to start by looking at UK legislation. Some general rules for referencing UK legislation. If you provide all the details of the legislation in the text, in your text, in your paragraph, then you don't need to provide an additional footnote. So, for example, if your sentence was, "This case highlights the far-reaching judicial role ushered in by the Human Rights Act 1998, that actually gives us the information that we need. However, if your sentence that you've written doesn't include the name of the act or the relevant section, then you can provide that information in a footnote. So, for example, British courts must only consider Strasbourg jurisprudence. They are not bound by it. And we can put in our footnote Human Rights Act, section 2, S2 for section 2. Generally, for acts, UK acts, you can use the short title and the year and use capitals for the major words and don't use punctuation. So, Shipping and Trading Interests Protection Act 1995, for example. If you want to use a short form of the title of the act, you can indicate this in brackets after the first complete footnote. So in this example, Nuclear Installations Act 1965, in brackets, you can put NIA 1965, and then in subsequent references, you could use that short title. Abbreviations for different parts of an act. So acts are divided into parts, sections, subsections, paragraphs, and subparagraphs, as well as the schedules at the end of an act. And these all have abbreviations that you can use. And these are listed on the slide. If you're specifying, though, a paragraph or a subsection as part of a section, you only need to use the abbreviation for the section in your footnote. So to give an example from the Human Rights Act, if I was quoting from paragraph B in subsection 1 of section 15, I could write that in my footnote as follows: Human Rights Act 1998, comma, S15, brackets 1, brackets B. As well as Acts of Parliament, you will want to cite statutory instruments, orders, regulations, or rules. These are numbered consecutively throughout the year, and the year of the statutory instrument combines with the serial number to provide an SI number. So in this case, penalties for disorderly behaviour, Order 2004, you then would put a comma and SI 2004 / 3166. So 3166 is the serial number. If you need to pinpoint within a statutory instrument, you can use the following relevant abbreviations. So parts, regulations, rules, and articles all have abbreviations that you can use in your footnotes. So moving on from legislation to having a look at cases, there are again just a couple of variations. If the name of a case is given in the text, it's not necessary to repeat it in your footnote. So, for example, if you've written the sentence, the no conflict rule is advocated by Lord Upjohn in Phipps and Boardman, you would then put your footnote marker, and in your footnote, you could provide the date, the volume, the law report, and the page number, but without needing to include the party names again. If you haven't referred to the party names in your text, you should just include the full details in the footnote. So, as the example shows, Phipps and Boardman, 1967, to AC46. Now, as we talked about earlier with journals, you'll find that references to law reports can again have either square brackets around the publication year or round brackets. So you use square brackets when the publication year is absolutely necessary to identify the volume of the law report where the judgment was published. So in the example below, Barrett and Enfield, LBC, the 2001 appears in square brackets. You then have a volume number 2, AC, which is Appeal Courts, Law Reports, and the first page, which is 550. If the volumes of a law report series are independently numbered, so they just, rather than starting again at 1 every year, they just continue through, you don't necessarily need the publication year to find the volume. So in this example below, it's the same case, Barrett and Enfield, LBC, and you'll see there's 1999 in the round brackets, and then 49 indicates volume 49. So 1999 is actually the date of the judgment, whereas in the first example, 2001, that is the year in which the report on that case was published. Now, for English cases after 2001, they include a neutral citation. So every case is given a code which makes it easier to find it online. However, in terms of referencing in your work, you also need to provide a reference to the most authoritative law report if it's been published in a law report. So in this example, you'll see we have the party names, the year, and the court case number. So the first part of that is the neutral citation. Then we have a comma, and we can then add in the publication details of where it was reported. So square brackets 2006 1 WLR 2582, that indicates that it was published in the weekly law reports in 2006. Pre-2001, cases were not given a neutral citation. So then the reference follows this order. Case name, Page and Smith. The year in this case 1996, and then the volume, if there is one, the report abbreviation, the first page, and in brackets you would indicate which court it was heard in. So in this case was heard in House of Lords. To pinpoint within cases, if you're wanting to pinpoint from the judgment and it has numbered paragraphs, you can pinpoint the relevant paragraph number in square brackets. So you'll see in this example that right at the end of the reference in square brackets there is 42, and that would mean it's from paragraph 42. If you're pinpointing to more than one paragraph, you can use separate square brackets and you link them with a comma. So 42, 45. But if you're citing a span of paragraphs, you can insert a dash. So in this example, if you had square brackets 42 dash square brackets 45, that would indicate that we were looking at 42, 43, 44, and 45. So those are the main points to consider for UK legislation and cases. Now we're going to move on to EU legislation. Official notices of the European Union are published in the Official Journal of the European Union, which abbreviates to OJ. And there are two series that you need to be aware of. Series L, which is legislation, and Series C, which is information and notices. So for EU treaties and protocols, you should set it out as follows. The legislation title, the year in square brackets, the official journal series, and then followed by the issue and the first page. So consolidated version of the Treaty on European Union, square brackets 2008, OJC, because it's series C, 115 is the issue, /13 is the first page. For regulation, directives and decisions, you have a similar order, but here you're going to indicate the type of legislation that it is, and then the legislative number, followed by the title, year, and issue and page numbers. So in this case, this is a regulation. So we have regulation EU, then the number is 2015/478, and then of the European Parliament and of the Council of 11 of March 2005 on common rules for imports. So there we have the title of the regulation, followed by then the publication details, 2015 OJL issue 83/16. Now in terms of European case law, we have the European Court of Justice and General Court. The official source for these cases is the European Court reports. ECJ cases are reported in Volume 1 and General Court GC cases are reported in Volume 2. And you'll find from 1989, ECJ cases have the preface C and General Court cases have the preface T. Outside of the European Court reports, you'll find the Common Market Law reports and the All England Law reports European cases also publish full reports of some of the ECJ hearings. And if the case hasn't been reported, you can cite the European Case Law identifier after the case name, which is essentially a European case neutral citation. If you want to pinpoint to particular paragraphs of a judgment, then you can put a comma at the end of your reference and write the abbreviation para, P-A-R-A, and then provide the paragraph number. So let's look at some examples here. So the order in which the citations goes is case number, case name, the year, the report abbreviation, and the first page. So you'll see in the first example as well, the pinpoint is to paragraphs 47 to 48. In the second example, we have in the case number case T, so you'll see the two of them are case C, and this one has the preface T. And in the third example, this is an example of a case identifier, so the neutral citation that I talked about that comes at the end of a reference if it hasn't been reported. And apologies for the first example where Commission and Council is not in italics. So again, it's very important to check your references and make sure that they are consistent. Okay, next up is European Court of Human Rights. For reported cases, you can cite either the official reports, which is the reports of judgments and decisions, ECHR, or the European Human Rights Reports, EHRR. And these follow what should be now a familiar pattern of the party names, the year, the volume, and the law report series details. For an unreported case, you can give the application number and the court and the date of judgment in brackets. And I think the key to all of this is to just remain consistent in how you're referencing your cases. Now, for international law, there is an official OSCOLA guidance on the OSCOLA website on citing international sources, which gives further details. In this presentation, I'm just going to give a couple of examples of key pieces of international law that you may want to cite. The first one is the United Nations Treaty Series. So the order of the citation, we have the treaty title, and then in brackets, we put the date of adoption or the date that the treaty opened for signature, and then following that, the date that the treaty entered into force. You will then put the publication details, so volume number, treaty series, and the first page, a short title if that's appropriate, and then if you are pinpointing to a particular part of the treaty, that comes at the very end of the reference. So in this case, Convention relating to the status of refugees, adopted 28th of July 1951, entered into force 22nd of April 1954. It is then volume 189, UNTS, which stands for United Nations Treaty Series, page 137. We have a short title, Refugee Convention, and in this example, we are pinpointing to Article 33. For bilateral treaties, you can give the treaty title and then, to ensure clarity, put the names of the party names in brackets after the treaty title. You then put the date of adoption and then the details of the treaty series from which this source comes. So in this case, you'll see at the end of the reference it is ATS 1994-15, and the ATS stands for Australian Treaty Series. For cases in international law, the International Court of Justice is obviously a key source that you will want to cite. If possible, cite the ICJ reports. Otherwise, you can cite from the ICJ website. If you do cite from the website, make sure that you give dates of access. So our example here, we have the party names and title, whaling in the Antarctic, Australia and Japan, New Zealand intervening. We then have the date, 2014, ICJ report, REP, which is the abbreviation for ICJ reports, and 228 is the first page. There are also the international law reports, and again you can follow a similar layout. So in this case it was a case of Rainbow Warrior, New Zealand and France. It was an arbitration tribunal, so you can indicate that in brackets and then put the publication details. So in this case 1990, which can go into round brackets because we know the volume number, which is 82, ILR, which is International Law Reports, and 499, which is the first page. If you need to cite legislation from other jurisdictions, OSCOLA doesn't necessarily give detailed guidance on this. Essentially, you can cite it as it is cited in its own jurisdiction, but make sure that you do things like remove punctuation from abbreviations and so on. You can give the jurisdiction if necessary, if it isn't obvious, and non-English words and phrases should be italicized. So you can see that in the examples below. So really you're just following a similar pattern to other legislation that you might cite. In the example below, though, we have the Accident Compensation Act of 1972, and then you'll see in brackets NZ for New Zealand. Now, in your work, it's likely that you will want to refer to a particular source more than once. And OSCOLA offers a system of doing this that works on the basis of providing a shorter subsequent reference. So when you first refer to a source, it should always be the full citation. So in this example, in footnote 1, we have Robert Stevens, Torts and Rights, OUP 2007. If the next citation is going to be from the same source, you can use the Latin word ibid, and if you need to provide a new pinpoint, then you can. So if footnote 2 was from the same source, I would put ibid. What is demonstrated in this example, though, is what you can do if you want to refer again to a source but it doesn't follow on directly. You can provide a shortened citation, so you can put the author's surname, this is obviously for books and journal articles, followed by a cross-reference to the original footnote. So if you were to refer to Stevens' work again in footnote number 26, you can put Stevens and then in brackets N1, which stands for footnote 1. And in this example, there's then a pinpoint of page 110. If you were then in footnote 27 going to refer to Stevens again, you can use IBID, even though the previous one is this much shortened reference. For cross-referencing cases, it follows a similar pattern. The first reference should always be the full citation. You can again use IBID if you, in the very next footnote, are referring to the same source. If it's not following on directly, you can use a short name of the case. So in this one, the example, the original party names were Austin and Commissioner of Police for the Metropolis, and we've shortened that just to Austin. And then again, in brackets, you can put the footnote where the full citation is located. So again, in this case, N1. For legislation, it's a little bit more straightforward. Your first reference, again, should be the full citation, and you should put the short form of the title in brackets at the end of your footnote. Again, if it's the very next citation, and you're referring to that same piece of legislation, you can use IBID and with a new pinpoint if necessary. If it doesn't follow on directly, you can just use the short form of the legislation, and you don't actually need to cross-reference to the original footnote. So in this example, we've got the Council directive concerning certain aspects of the organisation of working time, and you'll see in brackets the short form title is Working Time Directive. So if we were then to return to referencing this piece of legislation, we can just use the short form title, Working Time Directive, and then if you wish to pinpoint, you can do so. So comma ART2 for Article 2.